Imagine a new kind of investing, a potentially life-changing way to invest that honors biblical principles, the kind of principles that you and I grew up with. Since 1994, Timothy Plan has made biblically responsible investing possible, offering mutual funds and ETFs that are filtered for biblical principles. Don't compromise your values. Invest with Timothy Plan. Ask your financial advisor or call Timothy Plan at 1-800-TIM-PLAN. Again, that's 1-800-846-7526 and discover what it means to be a biblically responsible investor. Investing involves risk, including possible loss of principal. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objective, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com. Read carefully before investing. Mutual funds distributed by Timothy Partners Ltd. and ETFs distributed by Foreside Fund Services LLC. As a paid testimonial, there is no guarantee of future performance and each experience will differ. Hey there, welcome to another edition of the MemoPod. I've been gone for a week and you missed it, I missed it, we all missed it. And you can tell that as punishment for me missing a MemoPod, I got some kind of sinus infection towards the end of our road trip, which, in all honesty, I was highly anticipating outright misery. Being locked in a vehicle for 10 days, touring the East Coast and down into Florida and then back up through Georgia and Tennessee, back up into our home state of Indiana. I was highly anticipating a lot of fights in the vehicle, and we didn't have them. Now, once we stopped at various places, we toured a destroyer like the one my grandpa was on, and we went to, that was in Charleston, I think, and then we went to, it was Charleston, and then when we were in Hilton Head, we stopped there, and Savannah, and places like that. And every stop we made, we stopped in Knoxville and drove through the Gatlinburg area. Anyway, every stop we made, it was a fight about every 10 minutes. And it would just exchange. It would be the oldest two, and then it'd be the oldest and the youngest, and then be the youngest and the middle, and then it'd be the middle and herself. And then it would start back over at the top of the order. We just bat around. But it really was a great trip, and the time in the vehicle was actually pretty good. But I would say about 3 days to go in the trip, I could feel it coming the day before, and I woke up and it just bleh. But luckily, my personal physician, who also is the personal physician for a number of other people, it's because he's just an internal medicine doctor. But anyway, he had prescribed me an antibiotic, a Z-Pack, to take with us on the trip in case something like that happened. It did, and I started taking it, and my last one was today, and I'm feeling better. I just don't sound a lot better, but just a lot of great memories, and I'm sure things will come up, stories will come up at various times, but I'm excited to be back on the MemoPod for this week, and I'll let you know if you are a paid subscriber, and I'd love to have all of you as paid subscribers, but if you are a paid subscriber, when you stick through the break, on the other side of the break, a couple things I want to discuss, and one of the biggest is, I think I've got it figured out the way the presidential debates need to happen this time around. The old school debate style that we've got now, it's ridiculous. And everybody knows it's ridiculous, and everybody is already decided, and there's nothing new that's determined. There's no honesty, there's no forthrightness, none of it. And so, I've got it figured out. And I'll tell you exactly the way that I think that it should be. And also just a little bit of a rebuke for a fellow public, he is a much bigger public figure, a Christian public figure that I think has made a fairly serious error. All of that is in the second portion of the MemoPod. But today, let me speak for a second about a former president, not named Donald Trump, a former president named Barack Obama. Now, if you have been listening to me or been following me, and some of you in this audience have, since my earlier days, shall we say, When I was on the radio, I would drive over after school, and I had a radio program here in central Indiana, and it grew from a Sunday morning program that was 15 minutes a week every Sunday morning, and then it started being a half an hour on Monday, Wednesday, Friday in the afternoons, and then it grew from there, and pretty soon we were doing 2 hours every day after school. And then we shifted down to Indianapolis. That was kind of the growth, the rise, the meteoric rise of the radio program, and then the poof, collapse, and I walked away from it. But anyway, during those days where I was convinced, and I was trying to convince other people, that I was the next Rush Limbaugh, okay? Super serious about this. When I was doing my best to do that, I was mimicking and I was modeling what I saw in what I thought were the best radio hosts that were out there. I look back on those and I listen to some of those programs now, cringe a little bit, but more than that, not just the style and all of that, but as I have matured in my faith, the way that I view and the way that and I know this upsets some people, and I got to be careful how I say this because I don't want to make it seem like I don't think that they are maturing in their faith. If they don't understand why I take a different approach now than maybe I used to, I'm not saying that I'm so much holier than they are. I would like to think that I'm holier than what I once was. I'm not what I need to be, but I'm not what I once was. Paraphrasing an individual there. Oh, who was it that made that comment? Oh, yeah. Newton. John Newton, not Isaac Newton, the gravity guy. No, John Newton, the former slave trader, wrote Amazing Grace. By the grace of God, I'm not what I once was. And I'm not what I one day will be, or at least hope to be. But I'm not what I once was, and the way that I don't want to say that I hated Barack Obama, because I don't think that I did, but I characterized him and made him into a caricature that represented everything that was wrong with America. It didn't have anything to do with him being half black. I'm sure that plenty of racial activists and people that see race and everything would determine that. But I always thought that was silly, because at the same time that I was castigating Barack Obama, sometimes in ways that were unfair to him, I would say, at the same time I was doing that, I was singing the praises of Herman Cain. Before him was J.C. Watts. You remember J.C. Watts? Yeah, and Alan Keyes. Loved those guys. Those are black Americans. I was all for them. It wasn't the color of the skin. I was good with a black president. I've always been good with a black president. I just didn't want the socialist. And I felt like that's what we got. What I would say now is that I still get annoyed with the antics of Barack Obama, but I don't feel that self-righteous anger that I used to. Maybe it's because he's not president anymore. Maybe because I'm not dealing with what seemed to be the pretty persistent condescension towards those of us that see the world differently than him. And that's what stood out at me when I saw this statement of Barack Obama. If you didn't know, Barack Obama recently came out with a statement. It was like a press release, basically. You know how Donald Trump releases his press releases, and it's kind of in Twitter form? Well, Barack Obama's are more in letter form. And he waded into the mire of American culture wars again, which was something that he did with regularity during his presidency. And I still get frustrated when I see this. I'm not going to act like I'm way beyond my irrational anger with Barack Obama. There are times that I still get that way. And when I see him striking a glancing blow against the periphery of an issue that is far deeper and far more complex and far more nuanced than what Mr. Obama wants us to think that it is, I still get a little bit aggravated. I still get my dander up a little bit, but maybe not as much as I once did. And I think that there's a place here to take the statement of Barack Obama and say, okay, where are the points that I can agree wholeheartedly? And there were points in this. His statement, his press release, if you didn't see it, you don't know what I'm talking about. He was speaking to what he frames as this malevolent movement among us to ban books, to ban literature from libraries. And so he makes this public statement to librarians. And I've got it on my phone here. Oh, come on. I've got it on my phone here, and I'll read the statement to you if you haven't seen it. Okay? I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to read parts of it to you. To the dedicated and hardworking librarians of America. In any democracy, the free exchange of ideas is an important part of making sure that citizens are informed, engaged, and feel like their perspectives matter. So far, so good. It's so important, in fact, that here in America, the First Amendment of our Constitution states that freedom begins with our capacity to share and access ideas, even, and maybe especially, the ones we disagree with. Yeah, I'm totally on board with this. More often than not, someone decides to write those ideas down in a book. Okay, I want to put a pin in that and come back to it. Or as Jen Psaki would say, I want to circle back to that. Okay, so we'll be circling in a second. Let me now continue with his statement. Books have always shaped how I experience the world. Writers like Mark Twain and Toni Morrison, Walt Whitman and James Baldwin taught me something essential about our country's character. Reading about people whose lives were very different from mine showed me how to step into someone else's shoes. And the simple act of writing helped me develop my own identity, all of which would prove vital as a citizen, as a community organizer, and as president. Today, some of the books that shaped my life, and the lives of so many others, are being challenged by people who disagree with certain ideas or perspectives. It's no coincidence that these, quote, banned books are often written by or feature people of color, indigenous people, and members of the LGBTQ+ community, though there have also been unfortunate instances in which books by conservative authors or books containing triggering words or scenes have been targets for removal. Either way, Obama says, the impulse seems to be to silence rather than engage, rebut, learn from, or seek to understand views that don't fit our own. I believe such an approach is profoundly misguided and contrary to what has made this country great. As I've said before, not only is it important for young people from all walks of life to see themselves represented in the pages of books, but it's also important for all of us to engage with different ideas and points of view. And he goes on from there. Okay. Rather than take the most egregious portions of that, rather than read into it, because here's the deal. Obama goes on in this statement to chastise those who indulge their, as he puts it, impulse to silence rather than engage, rebut, learn from, or seek to understand what views that don't fit their own. And he goes on and he says, the world is watching what America does. They're going to follow our lead. If we eliminate voices of dissent, they're going to do the same. And we need to protect freedom of expression. Okay. I simply would offer a few observations that I would hope could expand this discussion a little further. Let me start here. The impetus for this press release. I don't think anybody can doubt this. I think it's seen in his complaint, and I just read it. These banned books are often written by or feature members of the LGBTQ+ community. So what Obama's doing here with this statement, and I think that this is a fair assessment, I think that I can state this without fear of contradiction. He is responding to the recent actions that have been taken by many school boards, by principals around the country, who have taken action to prohibit access to books like the one in particular that is well known is called Genderqueer. Because that book and several of the others, again, written by LGBTQ+ authors that Obama's referencing, but that book, Genderqueer, and a lot of them feature explicit sexual content that is aimed at kids. Okay. So it would be very easy. And I'll tell you, back when I did a radio show where, yeah, you're filling time, but you also need to have controversy. It's the nature of the business. Okay? And so back in those days, I would get pieces of audio of this, of people responding to this, and I would paint it in a certain direction, and I'd still think I was doing good. And in some ways, I think it is good to point out the counterpoint to the most extreme position that some might take. But I also think it would be misrepresenting Mr. Obama, which I don't think is, number one, exceedingly fair, number two, is the righteous thing to do as a Christian, or number three, is ultimately going to be productive. Because if all I do is assume the worst of Barack Obama and his intentions here, and I just destroy him or own him, the only people that are going to agree with me, and the only people that are going to see me as human and my arguments as rational, are people that already agree with me. There's going to be no persuasion, and the division and the dissension is only going to grow stronger and get worse. As a Christian, I'm called to, as long as it depends on me, live at peace with all men. And so I want to take this statement from a guy that I don't share many similar values with. And maybe that isn't fair. Maybe half of our values we share, but I'm concentrating on the others. I mean, I think most people want a safe home for their kids. They want people to be taken care of. They want our communities to prosper. I think most of us want that. We disagree on how to get there, but I think most of us value those things. But we're typically looking for the things that we disagree with, and then we're pretending that that is all that defines that other person. I can look at the two daughters that Barack and Michelle Obama raised in a very difficult and trying parental circumstance. President of the United States with two young daughters. Yes, I know they went to private schools. Yes, I know they had Secret Service protection. That isn't a normal life. You're not going to have a normal relationship with your daughters when you're flying off to Oslo. Or I shouldn't say you're not going to. It's going to be very difficult. They're not going to be raised in a standard home environment. But I think that Barack and Michelle tried to protect that. I think they tried to foster it. I think that they invested in their daughters' lives, and I think that it shows. I think that everything I've seen, they have well-adjusted daughters, seemingly dignified and respectful. I'm sure that there's pictures of them doing something rebellious. Okay, yeah, you can probably track that down. They're not in prison. They're not radicals that have been doing heinous things and burning down buildings and all sorts of stuff. I guess I think that he was a pretty good dad. I do. And from everything I've seen, I think Michelle was a pretty good mom. And I think that's something to be celebrated. And I think exactly because of that, follow me, because I believe he was a good dad and Michelle was a good mom, because they're good parents, I doubt that Barack Obama has ever even seen the book Genderqueer. And if he had seen the book, and if he opens it up, I think he would be repulsed by what he saw in Genderqueer. And he may not, because of his politics, be able to voice that openly, as much as I wish that he could or would. But I don't think he would have found that appropriate for his daughters at a young age. I'd be surprised if he finds it appropriate for them now, even in their grown state. I truly believe that he's never seen that book, or a number of these books that school boards and principals, by the way, they're not banning and they're not burning. They're simply not allowing access to it for young kids. There's a big difference there. That's something I would like to point out. And I would like Mr. Obama to meet me halfway on that and say, okay, well, I did put banning books or banned books in quotations because I know they're not truly banned. But I would also say to him, I think that there are many of those books that you're talking about that maybe have come under unfair scrutiny because of their perspective on America or whatever it might be. Books that were written by, as he put it, people of color or indigenous people. Look, if you really want to defend those books, don't lump them in with pornographic content like genderqueer. They're not the same thing. So don't do that. I think we can agree here on the value of ideas that we may not be comfortable with or we may not like, and still, even though we're agreeing that that stuff is important, we can still say licentiousness, that's the word. Licentiousness is not liberty. And lewdness is not free speech. And there's a huge difference between those two things. And we need to not call lewd, profane, pornographic works merely books that challenge our thinking. No, don't lump it in there with Howard Zinn. I think Howard Zinn, who just made up history and put it in a book, and a bunch of liberal universities teach it as history, when Howard Zinn said there's no such thing as a fact, or something along those lines. I mean, he's a disgraced storyteller, is what he is. I think it's a crock that those books are out there, but that's completely different than genderqueer, that is porn. I don't want my kids believing what Howard Zinn said, and so for that reason, I will teach them and show them all the places where Howard Zinn lied. But this over here, that's completely different. And I think Barack Obama, just like I think a number of people on the left, are sane enough to acknowledge that. I want them to be. Second observation I would make. I think Barack Obama is correct in saying that people often choose to express, how did he put it, express their dissenting, even dangerous opinion, disfavored ideas, that they will often write those down in what? In a book. That's what he said. I think they often write them in a book, but that's not always the case. That would be the second thing I would seek to point out here. It's not always the case that people with disfavored ideas write their ideas down in books. Sometimes they write those ideas down in a tweet. Sometimes they write those ideas down on Facebook. Sometimes they write those ideas down on a LinkedIn post. So if the president, the former president, Mr. Obama, truly believes that, and I'll quote him here, freedom begins with our capacity to share and access ideas, even and maybe especially the ones we disagree with, if he really believes that, then credibility, and by the way, I am willing to extend the benefit of the doubt and say he really does believe that. I think he's making a stand here for the value of freedom of speech, even speech that we disagree with. I'm going to say he's serious about it. Then credibility demands that he speak out forcefully and publicly, maybe even another one of these long-form letters like he just put out for the librarians, speak out against the federal government's collusion with big tech to suppress and to stifle and to silence conservative viewpoints. Here's what I wrote recently, and here's what I want to say to you, to the former president, to anybody and everybody. Shadow banning or censoring content that questions the U.S. government's position on climate change or public health and vaccinations, on election integrity, to censor or to silence those views is fundamentally as anti-American as preventing people access to the works of Walt Whitman or Toni Morrison. And that's what Mr. Obama was saying. I need him to acknowledge that point. I'm agreeing with him, and I need him to agree with me. Let's bring everybody together. Because if you're not willing to acknowledge that, then this whole statement that Mr. Obama has put out, it is dripping with disingenuousness, which is, by the way, the very thing that a lot of folks on the right have accused Barack Obama of being. He's not really serious about this. And he said in his letter that the world is watching us. So if the world is watching us, and I don't know how much I believe that they really are, I think the world does what they want to do. They're not just going to follow our lead on it. But I get the sentiment. If the world really is watching us, then I guess I hope Mr. Obama will model sincerity rather than cynicism. Cynicism defines this land. And it would be nice to see the former president being sincere and demonstrating that by acknowledging those couple things that I just said. Your thoughts are welcome on this. I would love to hear your thoughts. Peter@peterheck.com. That is peter@peterheck.com. You can send them my way. You can also reply to the email that you received this MemoPod in, or right there below, you can just post your comments in the comments section. And I always see them, do my best to respond, but obviously top priority goes to those who are paid subscribers, which I would add, those of you who are paid subscribers, a gentle rebuke to someone, and also my proposal, my take, what I think I have seen now. I've seen enough. This is how debates need to happen moving forward, at least on the Republican side. But I think when the general rolls around, that's the Republican and the Democrat running against each other in the general election, that the debates need to be handled the exact same way. So we'll talk about that. We'll do the general rebuke, all of that for paid subscribers, which comes right after this break. Those of you who are free, I got to leave you here, unless, of course, you just want to click the link and give us a shot. I mean, what's stopping you?
The Memo with Peter Heck.
Please patronize and thank all the sponsors of the Heck podcast, including McGonigal's Buick GMC, Terrell's Auto Service, Norris Insurance, Stevens Machine, Creative Financial Center, Indiana Right to Life, Tri-Green Tractor, the Indiana Family Institute, Hartman Family Farms, Liberty Financial Group, the Wyman Group, and J. Watson Creations.